Welcome to the episode of The Shift with Elena Agar. In this conversation, I chat with Shannon Talbot. She is the author of Breaking Free, Stop Holding Back, Start Being You. A really interesting book, very straightforward, very inspirational, asks you a lot of practical questions that make you stop and pause and like reflect on what's holding you back. We talked a little bit about the book throughout that conversation. We really shed some light on the complexities of success, of fear of happiness that so many of us have, a fear of that success, and really just making pivotal life changes. So really we talked about the perceived stabilities of career and what does that look like to be a person in the modern workforce, so to say, right? And the justifications we sometimes make to avoid happiness in our days. And how do we ultimately confront those fears? Like, what are the practical steps one can take if you are, in fact, paralyzed by fear or even fear of happiness and success, right? So not even a fear of failure, but it can be a fear of the positive things happening in your life. So really nice, down to earth kind of conversation. Enjoy it and let me know what you think. Shannon, welcome to the Shift podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm very excited to chat with you because you talk about all these things that are very exciting and dear to my heart. And so this conversation is for my audience, but also equally for me. So give me a little bit snapshot of what led you to write the book. Talk to me a little about who you wrote it for and kind of walk me up to that journey to writing the book that you wrote.
Sure. So I have to say it goes back to 2008. That was a big year for me. It was the year I got married. It was the year I went and did my MBA, and took a leave of absence. I'd worked in the banking world for just a few years at that point and went and did my MBA. And that was the year everything kind of started to shift for me. And as exciting a year as it was the year that I started to assume new titles, starting with wife. And then because I took time off work to go do my MBA, uh, I was relying on my husband's income for the first time. And that was really new to me because I'd made my own money since I was really young. I'd always worked hard. I'd always had side jobs and things like that. And because of this new shift in me and what was going on, I all of a sudden started to tell myself, oh, I have to act a certain way. And oh, I should do more wife duties and wear the hat of the wife, which I didn't really feel like I don't like cooking. There were certain things I didn't like to do. And then from there, it kind of just got heavier. So I became a people manager shortly after returning to work. And then told myself, "Ooh, you're responsible for other people now. You have to act this way." And then a few years later, I became a mom and again put those, as I call self-inflicted expectations on myself. And it all kind of started to build. And I wasn't good at managing my stress. I wasn't good at, managing my expectations. And then about how many years ago now? Almost 4 years ago now, I was pushing my youngest, who was 5 at the time, pushing him on a swing on a lunch break during COVID, and it was in the middle of winter, and he stopped and said, "Mommy, can I give you a goal this year?" And I got all excited because I was doing my coaching certifications at the time while working in advertising at this point, and I was like, "Yeah, bud, give me a goal. What's the goal?" And I expected him, I know you do personal training and stuff. I expected him to give me a goal around, like, push-ups or something physical because that's what he does. But his goal, he said to me, was, "Mommy, can I give you a goal to be less angry this year? Because you are angry all the time."
Mm,
And that wasn't the goal I was expecting.
yeah.
And it, it was a dagger to my heart, but it was the goal I needed to hear.
Mm,
Because for so long I'd been carrying around these expectations of myself, this pressure. I didn't know how to manage my stress and anxiety. And I also realized I was living a life that wasn't the one I'd really envisioned from when I was little. And it was a great life. And I have wonderful experience and everything, but it wasn't exactly what I thought I would be growing up and doing. I didn't grow up saying, I'm going to work in banking or I'm going to work in advertising. And it was in that moment where I said, okay, Shannon, enough is enough. It is time to live the life you were meant to live. And I gave myself permission and I dropped the guilt. And then I pursued having my own business. And now I'm a coach, I'm a speaker, and I wrote this book, Breaking Free, to help others live happier, healthier, and more fulfilling lives.
Yeah, it's beautiful. One of the things that kind of stood out for me in that and in the book and says granting yourself permission to be happy.
Mm.
That was a big one. Like just granting, and that's something you mentioned, like just granting yourself that permission to be happy. And it's amazing how if we don't pay attention to some of the ways that we just live our life until somebody tells us like, hey, maybe you should be, maybe you should work on that, like no
Yeah.
ill intent, right? But just like somebody who
Mhm.
genuinely cares, like in your case, like your kids, like, that was probably the most pure thing he could say, you know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
it was honest, but it was like pure, obviously, so it was I always say like feedback is a privilege. And I think sometimes we don't know though, Shannon, like we are so caught up and we don't know. Like what do you tell somebody who might not even know? Or like how do you become how do you know what you don't know, I guess?
And that's a thing, and that's a part of the book I talk about too. We all have blind spots, right? We
Hmm.
don't know these things. And it's funny, like occasionally I'll say something to my husband and he'll say, "Oh, I knew that." For example, when I got diagnosed with anxiety, I was already late into my 30s, and I just always had chalked it up to stress. And I came home and I said to my husband, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I have anxiety." And he's like, "Yeah?" I'm like, "What do you mean, yeah?" And he goes, "Oh, I could have told you that." But he didn't because he knew if he told me, I probably wouldn't have reacted the same way as a licensed professional, right? As a psychologist telling me you have anxiety. So I think you're right. It's a tricky, tricky thing that it depends on who it's coming from. Are we gonna pay attention to it? Are we gonna be offended by it? Or are we going to take it to heart and then take action on it? And in my case, yes, both of my kids had that impact on me, but actually when they were both 5 years old, which is interesting. But also up until just a few years ago, I'd never seen a psychologist, I'd never gone for therapy and I'd never worked with a coach. And now I can't imagine my life without people like that regularly that I see and that I don't wait for a crisis anymore. I have these people that I go and see regularly because we do all have blind spots that they sound scary, but once we uncover them, they're actually not so bad. And we can start to take action towards them and get rid of, the weight that's carrying us and holding us down. And it can be really freeing once we do that.
Hmm. Yeah, I tend to joke and say that everybody needs to have it, throughout their career and lives, for some portion of it at least, have a career coach, a mentor, and a therapist. I tend to totally agree with you. And I'm in talent development space, and I was delivering a workshop for a client not too long ago. And I did this poll. It wasn't in a poll. We were talking about some of the challenges that they have internally, like as a team. And it was like a couple of different departments, dozens of people in each one. And what was interesting, we went around, we're just kind of like, like talking about, I don't want to give too much away, but we were just kind of basically like talking about when they feel the, most, I guess, happiest at work and those kind of, there was like a lot of reflections around that. And you would be surprised how many people would talk about they feel happiest when they are accomplishing something. So there was like a mix of people saying like, oh, when I feel accomplished and I'm doing something. And then the whole side of the house was like, well, when I go on vacation or when it's 5 o'clock and I leave work and so on. So it was a very interesting discussion. And that brought me to thinking, I was like, okay, so if we know that it makes us feel good to accomplish things, why don't we do more of that, no matter how small it is, right? And in organizations and as individuals. And on the flip side, if you are in a situation where you feel like your happiest moment is when you go on vacation or when it's 5 p.m., you're probably not in the right position. I'm not saying everybody should have, love their jobs 100% of the time, but if you're not, you know what I mean? If that shouldn't be the
Mhm.
first answer that you give. And it was a very genuine, like it was like a lot of people have stated that. And I reading the room, I believe they meant it. So what do you think about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. It's amazing. I can't think of the statistics offhand, but the number of people that do not feel fulfilled in their careers is astounding. And I just, I'll hear it all the time from clients. I hear it from other people that are in my circle. And it's like, well, yeah, but it's a paycheck or it pays the bills or it's safe. And, you know, we, we become adults and we think we sometimes have to take the safe, the stable route.
Mm,
Um, and I'm sure you see this too in your line of work, but jobs aren't as stable as they used to be.
not at all.
Right?
Yeah.
So that stability that used to be there isn't there anymore as much as, we'd like it to be. And, people I hear all the time, "Oh, I'll start a hobby when I retire or when my kids get older or this or that." And it's like when that project ends, but then another project starts. And I think the thing is we're constantly justifying why we shouldn't be happier today, and I think we should stop that. I think, I say in the book, dreams aren't just for kids. We are all entitled to dreams. Sure, some may not be fully realistic. Like if you want to be, I don't know, play in the NBA or something like that, and you're already in your 40s, it's probably not going to happen.
Right.
But we can allow ourselves to dream more. We can allow ourselves to find more happiness in the small things too, and just bring more of that joy and energy into our lives because I think it's so important to do it now versus constantly waiting for that next moment or the best time to happen because more than likely that time will not come or we'll have another excuse when it does come.
Oh, when it comes, we might not want those things anymore.
Yeah.
That might be it. Like, by the time you retire, you might not be there health wise, which is a whole other topic that my audience knows I love to get into. But we're going to talk about longevity another day. I'm curious. Somebody who's listening to this, and kind of from what I hear you saying is, and what I've experienced myself as well, is it's a lot of fear. And so there's a lot of fear around dreaming and dreaming big, right? I feel like that's the root of the
Mhm.
emotions that you feel. It's just fear. So what do you recommend for somebody who's just like, okay, I know I'm afraid. I need that security. I don't want to take a huge risk. Like what are one step that they can take, like baby step that's not as threatening, but also easy to do? Like what is there like a starting point?
So the first step that I would suggest is to ask yourself, what is the worst case scenario that could happen? We love to play the worst case scenario game. And even better is to write it out either on paper or on the computer, but write down, okay, what is your fear and what is the worst case if it comes true?
Mm,
And I have like a bar that, okay, the absolute worst case that can happen, if it hits that level, I will not do it. My worst case scenario bar is death. So I will never jump out of an airplane. That's not ever going to happen because it terrifies me. I
you
know
and I
lots of
both.
people have done it and they love it and it's pretty safe, but for me, the risk is too high.
Yeah.
So things like extreme sports for me, the risk is too high. Right? But another thing, public speaking. I think it's like between 85 and 95% of people, their top fear is public speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just say I'm weird. I love public speaking. That's a big part of what I do. But let's just say I didn't. Then I would ask myself, am I going to die from going and speaking to an audience or from raising my hand in a meeting or for going and sharing that idea with my boss? Am I going to die from that?
Mm-hmm.
No, highly unlikely. So then it's like, okay, well, what's the worst case that could happen?
Mm-hmm.
And that's usually where the next worst case is usually what plays into our beliefs about ourselves, right? So it's like, oh, I could look stupid, or I might not look look like I know what I'm talking about. It may hold me back from a promotion, and these are all again like they could happen, but are they likely to? Probably not. So it's getting, what is the worst case that can happen? Knowing what is your like absolute worst case you're not willing to pursue. And then on the flip side, asking yourself, what's the best case scenario? So if I put my hand up in a meeting and share my opinion, what might happen? Oh, maybe I'm going to share a really incredible idea that no one had thought of. Maybe I'm going to get noticed and senior leadership's going to notice me or what, maybe I am going to say something really stupid and I'm going to learn from my mistake. but we won't know until we actually try it. So it's worst case, and then what's the best case scenario. And if I could share just one story on that.
Please, please.
Um, so when I worked in banking for 15 years. And when I was in banking, my undergrad is business. I have my master's in business. My whole life revolves around business. And I went away on a retreat with a coach, very first time working with a coach. And I went away on a 3-day retreat to figure out what I wanted in my career. And what I ended up coming home with shocked me. I came home with a statement that said, I am a successful entrepreneur who helps women live happier, healthier, and more fulfilling lives. At the time, before this retreat, I just assumed I was going to keep climbing up the corporate ladder. I never wanted to be like a CEO or anything, but I wanted to be really senior in a company. And I assumed going in there that I was going to figure out, okay, what industry am I going to work in and what level do I want to get to and all of this. And what came out was I actually wanted to have my own business. And I had that statement. And at the time, if I had let fear step in, the fear would have said, like, Shannon, who do you think you are? You don't have any credentials. Like, what are you doing? Your background is business. How are you going to help people? But I let it go. And I just put the line out there and I said, okay, I have 10 years to figure it out. And in 10 years, I'll figure out the how, or I'll take the right courses or whatever it is, but I'm not going to let that stop me today. My dream came true in 2 years.
Mm,
And so again, no matter what your dream is, doesn't have to be leaving the corporate world or anything like as dramatic as that.
mhm.
But no matter what it is, if you can just let go of the fear, or at least not let it hold you back and take one action step, one small thing towards it, or just, getting rid of the worst case scenarios from stopping you, then it's amazing what can happen.
I love that. I have a quote on my whiteboard that I'm looking at here, and it's not even a quote. I heard this. I don't know where I heard it. I don't even know who to give credit to. Honestly, I'm sure there's different versions of this, but there are two things that I try to live by as much as I can. One is have fear, but don't have doubt.
Mm.
So you can, like be afraid, but like believe that it can happen type of thing. And then you're not your thoughts or your past.
Yes, I love
And
that.
and I love your fear setting exercise and the worst case scenario and the best case. I've started this a while back, and it's probably one of the most productive things I've ever done, because a lot of the times when you write it down, it's almost like I don't remember last time something was like, oh my God, I'm not gonna do it because the worst case is so bad. Like, except maybe extreme sports, to your point. I just don't do it.
Right.
I'm good. I'm good on that. I'm not jumping out of it. I don't go diving. I'm good. Like, I don't need it. I'm okay. But it's a really interesting exercise. And Tim Ferriss, you might be familiar with Tim Ferriss. So he has he kind of goes even deeper into this. He says, set your fear, set your worst case scenario, and then find alternatives of how can you minimize the risk. So even if it is, for some people, it could be like, I'm not gonna have a job. And then if you're supporting a family, okay, so how can you minimize the risk of that happening? Or
Mhm.
how can you soften the blow of if that does happen? And something I wanted to also bring up that recently I came to realize, and I don't know why it took me so many years. I've traveled my whole life in different parts of the world and around the US. And what I've noticed is that this whole pursuing what we love, and the topics we're talking about today, is a very, very privileged. It's not a privilege that many people have access to. So what I mean by that, some people don't have a choice but to work a job they probably hate. Um, and a lot of times it's just about putting food on the table. But then also, or not but and also the other aspect of this is that majority of the people listening to this podcast and reading your book are not in that category. And I
Mm.
think that's a good distinguisher, because a lot of times we forget how that it is a privilege, and it is insane not to take advantage of that, like not to, because there's a lot of people who don't have access to doing what they want to do, or and so on, like in the Western world, right? But even in, like, I'm in the US, even in the US, a lot of people don't have access to it. So if you have
Yeah.
access to it and you don't do it, I'm mind blown why you don't.
Yeah, you're right. It's so true. And it is such a privilege. It is such a privilege to be able to chase our dreams and go after more of what we want and all of that. I totally agree. Um, and yeah, exactly. If you have the privilege, why not do it? Yeah, great advice.
Something else that you mentioned in your book, and it was something around fear, but a little bit different, was fear of success. Fear
Mhm.
of what if it actually all works out. I think that's a scary thought for a lot of people. Talk to me
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I heard Brene Brown speak a few years ago, and she talks about how we tend to wait for the other shoe to drop, right? So something's going really well in our life, maybe going really well, and then we're like, okay, well, obviously something bad's going to happen, or
Hmm.
we're just waiting for it.
That's my
And
life on a weekly basis.
and I think and that's a thing, and it's funny because I never really thought about the fear of success until I was right in the middle of writing my book, and I attended an event in Montreal, Canada, and with the event, you got a free, like, 30-minute coaching session with a coach. Didn't know this person or anything. I felt a bit guilty because 'cause I'm like, "I am a coach, and, should I be using this service?" I was like, "Oh, you know what? It's free. I'm gonna do it." And I started chatting with her. And I was chatting with her at the time because at the time, I was focused on my coaching business, but I wasn't focused on my speaking business. And I said, Dory, I really want to grow my speaking business. And she asked me a bunch of questions. And it was like, okay, well, what are you worried about? Well, reaching out to somebody and them not responding to me. And back and forth a few things. And in the end, she's like, okay, so you're worried about people ghosting you? Is that what you're really worried about? And I was like, "Ugh, not really. Cause like, what does that do?" And then it was like, "Are you worried about people liking you, like everyone liking you?" I'm like, "No, because I know not everyone's gonna like me." And then it all of a sudden came out. It was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm worried about getting the yeses. I'm worried about clients booking me to speak because then I actually have to deliver. Then I
Yeah.
actually have to create a talk, create the slides, memorize them, have the great, the stories that are going to bring people along. And then it's like, "Oh gosh, they're agreeing to have me there, and then what if I
Hmm.
suck?"
Hmm.
And that was the light bulb moment for me. And then ended up, it's something now I work with my clients on, and I include it in the book because we don't think about fear of success.
Hmm.
And a lot of times it shows up as self-sabotage. So we don't even know we're doing it. We're like, we tell ourselves, like, I'm gonna do, I'm gonna reach out to people or I'm gonna try this out, but we may not be giving it our full effort because we don't actually want it to come true.
Yeah, I think I think that's probably true for more people than the fear of doing. I think the fear of actually like getting the yeses, to your point,
Yeah.
is scarier than the rejection, or like
Yeah.
the not being able to do something. I think that's so spot on. And it's really interesting, and I'm curious what you think about it, because like where maybe this is an obvious question, or maybe an impossible one to answer, but where did we go wrong as society when we collectively know that we have these insecurities and all of that, and when we're kids we're so curious and we're so outspoken and we're so, I'm not saying we should be all so honest like kids are, because we all know kids can be a little bit too honest, but you know what I mean, like at some point the world just like pushes us down as we grow older and we grow in our careers, and somewhere along the way we lose this curiosity and creativity and this, this fearlessness in a not, I'm not talking jumping off airplanes fearlessness, but just this fearlessness of trying new things. Where, like, what happened? Why does it keep happening?
Great question. You're right. It is a little impossible, not impossible to answer. I can
Yeah.
give my take on it, but I think it's a really, really important question. And I think it's a whole bunch of factors, right? I think even if I look back, it's interesting. Now that you're asking that, and I look back to 2008, what also happened that year or into 2009 was a recession.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden, myself included, I went to back to school to get my MBA to change industries. I wanted to try something new that was different than banking. Recession hit, there were no jobs. In fact, people were letting people, companies were letting people go. I was like really privileged to be able to go back to my old job. They'd held it for me. And I ended up staying there for a while. But I think that's the thing. It's, something happens in society or in the economy, and it scares us and then kind of puts us back to where we were. And we let the dreams or whatever go on the back burner, right? We're like, "Oh, okay." And we go back to, "Oh, in a couple years or when things settle down and na na." And for me, I then went on to try and have kids. My husband and I struggled with infertility. We ended up adopting our boys. So that became my priority. And that was about my next 5 years or so. That was my focus. And then I'll never forget this young woman, the daughter of a former employee of mine or former colleague of mine, asked if she could meet me to talk about the program I'd taken in university. And we met and we were chatting. And then she says to me, "And then why did you go do your MBA?" And I went, "Oh, to change industries." And then it dawned on me that was 10 years ago. And I'm like, here I was 10 years later. I still hadn't done it either. So I
Mhm.
think sometimes it's, events happen that scare us, that fear holds us back. Sometimes it's, we listen to somebody like a parent or sometimes, most mentors are really great, but occasionally we'll get a mentor who's a bit biased, right? And
Mhm.
they might give us advice that we follow that wasn't the right advice for us, or we meet somebody, a life partner or a friend who gives us advice that we follow, and we stop trusting our intuition. We stop trusting our gut. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes we can make is forgetting that we know what's best for us and listening to what, our heart or our gut is telling us and to try and go for it.
Yeah, it's I agree. I think sometimes just life happens, you know. But and also I think sometimes I'm just thinking of my own journey when I was in my like postmasters, maybe mid-20s or so, and I was in and out of just environments that weren't really healthy, that weren't really serving me. I felt really miserable. And then I was like, well, whether it was the work I was doing, whether it was relationship I was in, whether it was the circle of friends that I had. And so for me, I don't even know. I think it just kind of happened. But for me, I got a job in a different city. And so I had to move, and removing myself from certain situations and being on my own and realizing like, oh, like I chose some of those environments. Like that was my choice. And a lot of times getting out of that, which I think is hard for a lot of people, because if you've had, especially if you're in, relationships and so on, like it's hard to get out of environments that don't serve you. And I'm convinced that a big portion of our level of success will depend, or level of success, however you want to define it. In my case, I define it as somebody who just does what they enjoy and grows and so on, and just has that joy in life. Will depend on who's around us. And it's hard. That's hard to change because sometimes those people are your family, and that's hard to let go of. Sometimes it's, your significant others. Sometimes you have, kids with that person. So there's a lot of those things. And I think that's probably why it's also hard for people to pause and be like, do I really want to do this? Because if the answer is no, it can completely uproot their whole life. And that's
Yeah.
hard. The older you get, that the harder it gets. For me, I was lucky. I was in my mid-20s and I was able to be like, yeah, I'm just gonna move and like peace out, like start fresh, start over somewhere. Um, but I think that's another big one as well. Is that's yeah.
Yeah, and it's true, like, sometimes it is the harder route, right? Being happier tends to be the harder route because we have to
Yeah.
make the tough decisions, and, yeah, it may mean, as you're saying, like, moving on from certain people, moving on from certain things, moving cities, whatever that is, um, but I think, I liken any change to a home renovation. And whether you've done a home renovation or you've just seen one on TV, it starts with a vision, right? It
Mm.
starts with that idea that maybe there is something better out there or something that can bring you more joy, more energy. And then what happens next? Well, the demolition or, having to move out of your kitchen or your bathroom or whatever that is. It's messy. You might have dust all over your house. It might cost more than you thought. It might take more time than you thought. And it's all this messiness and uncomfortableness and everything. And that is transformation, right? It
Yeah.
feels worse before it feels better. It feels really hard. Some days you don't want to continue doing it. But if you can think of a home renovation, like once you get through it, it's worth it. The end result is usually better than where you started, but it's
Hmm.
getting through the messy. That's the hard part. And that's what we need to get better at sticking to, because so often we give things up right before we almost reach, that greater state of happiness.
Yeah, I love that home renovation. I like it. I love it. It's a perfect description of basically what you go through.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's pretty practical tips in terms of setting your fear, looking at his home renovation. I think just understanding that it's supposed to be hard. I like it that you said that, like, it's not supposed, like, it's going to be hard. Like, and I think that's the other thing is, like, it's like a muscle. You gotta build that muscle up to deal with BS and whatever it is, and something you've said in your book as well. It says, it's time to call BS, like the chapter you literally, I think you call it the chapters, it's
Yeah.
time to call BS, that I don't have time, I'm not enough. No, 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 no. Like, that's not what it is. It's just you don't want to deal with the BS that comes with change. And maybe
Yeah.
that's, and you got to get real with yourself. And it's hard to do. I mean, I'm talking about myself as well. There's a couple of different areas that I could probably do differently or better at. So this conversation is handy at the moment. So I told you it's a very selfish conversation. It's just for me. I do this for me.
Yeah, we all
But
can, we all can, and I think sometimes too when you're in it, then you
yeah,
notice more things, right?
yeah,
Again, it goes back to home reno. Once you pull your walls back, you see other stuff, right? And
yeah.
it's
And
like
you're like, oh my
same
God.
with us. Once you start peeling it back, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, oh, there's that and that, and
Yeah.
yeah,
It's tough.
fun.
It's tough. It's tough. Have you seen it as if is it easier, like, I guess, is it harder for women and easier for men? Like, do you have any thoughts on that? Because I always feel like women are worse critics of themselves than men, but it might be I'm just biased, but I'm just
I
curious.
so I work with more men than women, but I will say the men I work with face the
Hmm.
exact same obstacles as women. I think they're just better at hiding it.
Yeah, they probably just don't talk
I
about
think
it.
they're
Yeah.
just not they're and they feel again, this is me just totally speculating based on my experience with my clients, but I think also men almost carry more shame with it than
Mm,
women. Because the men are like, "Oh, I'm supposed to be more confident," or "I'm supposed to be more, you know, clear on where I'm going," and things like
right.
that. So they have these expectations of how they're supposed to act, and if they're not feeling that way, then they carry a bit of shame with them. But yeah, I think we do. I think we face a lot of the same obstacles, but men are just able to whether or not they are more confident, they can come across as way more confident in certain things for sure.
Yeah, well, we all know this from the statistics from, like, interviews and stuff.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
Statistically, they're women. We should learn something from them. Interesting. So I really enjoyed your book. It's very practical. I love it that you give very kind of, like, you ask questions, and it's a really practical read in terms of actions that one can take. And I think just, again, hearing some things that, it's for myself that I was already thinking about, and I was like, oh, okay. I was like, well, yeah, okay, she has a point. And it's really like a moment for self-reflection with action steps. So I really appreciate you writing the book. I think it's brilliant. Where can people find it? Can they find you? Where do you hang out at the most online?
Sure. So you can find the book on Amazon. It's Breaking Free, Stop Holding Back, Start Being You. You can find more information about my programs and services at shannontalbot.com. And then I primarily post a lot on LinkedIn, so Shannon Talbot on LinkedIn, and then I'm also on Instagram as well, Shannon Talbot underscore coaching.
Excellent. And I'm going to make sure to include all that in the show notes, as always, for those that are listening. And the last question I ask all of my guests, and you've already stated a few different things, so you can recycle or you can come up with a new one. It's totally up to you. But the question is, what is one question you wish people would ask themselves more often?
Hmm. Okay, so this is I wasn't going to go with this one, but I am, because I have an exercise in the book that's related to this, and it's morbid, but I think it's an important question. When you are on your deathbed, what do you want to be able to look back and feel good about? Right? I don't think we're scared of death. We think of like fear, we fear death a lot, but we don't always think about, okay, when I'm lying, like after hopefully a very long, happy, healthy life, you're in your hundreds, let's just say, when you look back, what do you want to be able to say you did?
Mm. You're just keeping it real with us. I don't know if I like it. I don't know if I like it. You're making me, I feel like I need, now I feel uncomfortable. Now I feel like I need to step it up a little bit and calling me out
Good,
personal
do
on some of
it,
the
go.
BS. So, no, it's a great question. It's a great question, and it's one we all need to think about. Whether you live to 180, whatever that magic number is for you. But no, it's excellent. I love that question. Shannon, thank you so much for having a chat. Thank you for your time. I look forward to hopefully doing a part two at some point and just seeing what you're up to in the coming months and years.
Thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. I'd love to come back.